Every athlete leaves something behind. Not just records, but moments that changed the way the game felt. Some stories are loud. This one isn't. Tonight, we slow it all down. And listen. This is Jackie Robinson's Quiet Rise, a poetic retelling of baseball's bravest legend. A soft wind moved through Cairo, Georgia, in the quiet of January 1919. Winter in the South doesn't always feel like winter. Just a stillness, a hush that lingers beneath the trees. The kind that makes shadows lean longer than they ought to. The kind that leaves a town steeped in silence, not peace, just silence. No scouting reports, no headlines. But on that modest morning, a woman named Molly gave birth to her fifth child. A boy named after a president, Jack Roosevelt Robinson. No one cheered. No front-page ink bled for him. But somewhere, deep inside the soil that raised him, a seed had been pushed into the ground, a seed that would one day split concrete. The world didn't welcome him. It barely noticed him, but something beneath the ordinary was already taking shape. Like a match flickering in a cave. Destiny doesn't crash through the door, sometimes it just waits. Watches. Breathes with you until you're ready to rise. Cairo whispered its warnings early. That he was born the wrong color, into the wrong time, for the kind of dream he would one day reach for. But babies don't know about segregation. They don't yet know the weight of history or the language of hate. They only know touch, milk, safety. And when Jackie opened his eyes, he saw a mother who had sky in her backbone and thunder in her lullabies. Still, the land around him remained unkind in its quiet. Laws spoke louder than decency. And beneath every sunrise was a reminder. Some were permitted to belong, others were expected to disappear. In Cairo, cotton still ruled. And so did the myth that the world would never change. But even myths tremble when a quiet story begins to take form. And Jackie's story was beginning, slowly, like ink through fabric. No rush, just certainty. Before he would sleep in hotel rooms or be denied from them. Before he would sign baseballs for strangers who once screamed slurs. Before the crowds, uniforms, glory, rage. There was just a boy. A boy born into a land that didn't think much of him. Where doors stayed closed, where names like his didn't echo, and where even kids had to learn caution before they could learn confidence. But something else happened too. He started breathing with rhythm, with awareness, like his lungs understood something even he didn't yet. That one day, the rules he was born under would crumble beneath his feet. That one day, people would wear his number not as a statistic, but as a symbol. That one day, they would look back at that house in Georgia and understand that greatness doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes, it begins in whispers. In tiny fists that will hold bats and hearts that will hold fury. In streets with no signposts, but quiet trails laid down by a mother refusing to let her children inherit shame. History was already watching, sitting just past the porch rail. Unsmiling, but waiting, not yet ready to speak, but starting to listen. And somewhere in that listening, Jackie Robinson began. When Jackie's father left, he didn't slam the door. He simply vanished. One sunrise, he was there. The next, just an echo tucked into the folds of a faded family photo. No letter, no reason, no final words to soften the wound. Molly Robinson stood at the edge of their front step, 5 children at her feet. A silence burning in her chest far louder than grief. She didn't crumble. She repacked what couldn't be carried, gathered what weight she could disguise as hope, and marched her children across the country. From Georgia's red clay to California's pale promise. Pasadena, a place where dreams had cleaner sidewalks, but not cleaner hearts. The train ride west was not a journey. It was an exhale after centuries of holding breath. It was Molly's quiet rebellion. If the world wouldn't give them room, she would steal space for her children with her bare hands if she had to. Their new house stood on Pepper Street. painted in restraint, a rental that belonged more to fear than to them. But when Molly walked through its doorway, carrying a baby on one hip and hard-earned pride on the other, she declared it theirs. Subtle resistance lives in such acts. Neighbors peered through curtains. Some nodded. Most turned away. The doors didn't swing open with casseroles and warm welcomes. Instead, they clicked shut, the way people do when they think kindness has limits. When they think struggle is contagious. Jackie was 5, small, watchful. He carried no bitterness yet, only questions he couldn't phrase. Why did other kids' mothers laugh louder? Why did some smiles freeze when he came close? Sides were already being drawn, quietly, in the soil of playgrounds and sidewalks. Race didn't speak to him in shouts. It hummed, in the way chalk hopscotch games ended before he could jump. In the way a ball rolled toward him but no one asked for it back. Still, he learned to run. Not away, but toward. In alleys where soft dust settled by 4 p.m. in schoolyards ignored by a light, ignored by funding, but never ignored by him. He ran with fists open, with questions tight beneath his ribs. He ran because motion felt like defiance. Molly watched her children from behind thin curtains. She had no wealth, but she gave them rhythm. Routine. An unbreakable kind of discipline stitched into oatmeal mornings and whispered prayers for walls too thin. Her ceilings leaked, but not her belief. She survived by stretching pennies and hope until both snapped, then stitched them back again by hand. She worked, always. Cleaned white homes, scrubbed white porcelain, and then came home to brown skin, brown eyes, and children too bright to fit into the boxes the world kept building. Jackie noticed. He noticed the tired in her walk, the care in her grin, the defiance in the way she stood upright even when pride cost more than groceries. He carried that with him. Like armor, like scripture. She never said he was better. Just that no one was better than him. And skies on Pepper Street were big enough to dream under. Even if the dreams had fences. Even if his skin invited commands instead of questions. Pasadena didn't make him, but it tested what was forming. The boy who walked forgotten sidewalks was already becoming the man history would try to define too late. Pain visited young, but so did rhythm. He started swinging bats in empty lots, feet bare, heart full, with stolen bases between sprinkler heads and sunsets that never judged. The game hadn't claimed him yet, but it circled, watching from the edge of sandlot laughter. He was still small, still searching. Yet already, Jackie moved like someone unwilling to vanish. Even before the roar, he was learning how to stand in silence and not disappear. At John Muir High School, Jackie was a shadow in motion. Not loud, not boastful, just there, so present it shook people. He didn't walk down hallways, he slipped through them. Not unnoticed, but somehow ungrabbable. Like holding water in your hand. They called him talented, but always in ways that kept him small. A natural athlete, as if talent had outpaced thinking. As if speed could explain spirit. Jackie moved through sports like breath. Football, basketball, track, baseball. Each one a language he didn't just speak. He translated them, made them sing. He set records in cleats barely tied. Leapt over defenders. Threw passes sharp enough to cut wind. Ran relays like he was chasing a future he could already see. But even then, baseball, America's game, seemed oddly distant. Almost indifferent. He batted well enough, fielded with quiet strength, but no one crowned him a prodigy. Still, he played, because playing let him forget. Forget the stares on city buses. Forget the way shopkeepers paused when he walked in. Forget the boxes the world kept trying to fold him into. The track became his haven. In spikes and silence, he set new records for Pasadena, 11 seconds. 10.8, faster than the voices that doubted him. And in basketball, he flew. laid the ball gently beside glass backboards like he was offering grace. Spectators stayed silent a little too long, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't yet know how to cheer for him. Anger hadn't come yet. Frustration, yes, but not anger. Jackie didn't break things. He broke away. From expectations. From dismissals. From a town that believed excellence had a skin tone limit. He kept his head down but his eyes up. And when teachers said, exception, he heard, alone. There's a loneliness in being the standard. In proving them wrong, and still not being invited to the table. He watched his older brother Mac push through too. A silver medalist behind Jesse Owens, and even then, barely mentioned. Jackie saw what the world gave black brilliance, applause without opportunity. But sparks gather in the corners of silence. And Jackie Robinson wasn't a storm. Not yet. He was the flicker before fire. The breath before shout. He was learning where the cracks were, how to run between them, how to see without being seen. Even the ball started to notice. How he charged it with certainty. How his cleats found earth in a way that made it remember him. How he never waited for permission to take space. Resistance, back then, wasn't loud. It was in the way he lined up at the starting block. In the way his hands tightened around a basketball. In the way he played every sport like it was the last time he'd get to prove he should be there. Intensity wrapped in grace. Fire wrapped in form. His coaches were amazed, some even afraid. Not of failure, of possibility. What happens when someone uninvited outgrows the room? You pretend you didn't see. Or you whisper, angry, as if emotion disqualifies worth. But Jackie didn't yell, didn't protest, not yet. He just kept showing up, kept running, kept catching a world that kept trying to let him fall. He was only 16, still sorting through who he was, and what being himself might eventually cost him. But the rhythm was building. Low, steady, unseen. A spark, waiting. A current, growing. The world didn't know it yet, but resistance had laced up its shoes. And it was starting to run. Pasadena Junior College felt bigger, wider hallways, bigger games, brighter lights. But the wideness didn't always invite him in. Jackie walked onto that campus not just as an athlete, but as a test. For the coaches, for the crowds, for the country. He wore the number, bore the hopes, and carried something invisible. A heaviness that clung beneath his uniform. They clapped when he scored, but never quite relaxed when he walked by. On the field, he flew. Quarterback, shortstop, guard. He could pivot like light turning in water. He played with a pulse that made hearts pound. But off the field, his steps were quieter. More watched, more questioned. There were games he dominated, 3 touchdowns, 2 stolen bases, 1 chase down block. He lit up scoreboards like someone breaking through fog. But the applause always came with a pause. A feeling he could never quite outrun. He sat alone sometimes, not because he chose to, but because no one chose to sit beside him. The cafeteria had tables, but not always seats. And he knew it. The invisible rules. Where to walk, when to smile, how loud to laugh, and how fast to shrink when someone looked twice. Still, he kept showing up. Every corner of that campus held a memory, a stare on the stairs, a name misspoken on purpose, a phone booth that never worked when he needed it most. And then there was the night he was arrested. Not for stealing, not for breaking, but for standing up when pushed down. He'd witnessed a white friend being hassled, stepped in, as anyone should. But anyone, he learned, didn't mean him. The officers didn't ask, didn't wait to listen, just grabbed, shoved, booked. The ink on the fingerprint card felt colder than any tackle. Jackie didn't cry, but he didn't forget. Not the cell wall, not the silence afterward. He returned to campus the next day, battered but unbent. And in that moment, something crystallized. A shift, not in how the world saw him, but in how he chose to carry himself inside it. People think courage roars, but sometimes courage walks back to class with its shoulders high, even when every hallway whispers. He kept winning games, kept studying, kept learning not just plays but people. How some praised his knees but not his mind. How others offered smiles but never trust. Still, Jackie ran across that track like possibility had a finish line. Sprinted into the arms of future teammates, even if their hands hesitated to meet his. He was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep solves. The kind that seeps into the chest, a fatigue braided with anger and restraint. But he wore it like a jersey. Didn't let it slow his swing. Didn't let it dull the edges of his drive. Even bruised, he outran bitterness. Because deep down, he believed, or wanted to believe, that excellence could crack something open. That maybe, just maybe, if he kept dazzling, doors would dare to stay open a little longer next time. It wasn't hope, not fully. It was something rougher, sharper, maybe even more powerful. A decision, to keep moving, to never vanish. Jackie Robinson was tired, but tired didn't mean done. And buried beneath that tiredness, his fire burned even brighter. At UCLA, Jackie walked campus paths like someone made of rhythm and resolve. The sunshine followed students across manicured lawns, but shadows trailed him longer. You could feel it in the air, admiration curled tightly with unease. Because Jackie didn't just show up. He arrived, a four-sport athlete: football, basketball, baseball, track. A feat not just rare, but singular. He flew down football fields as a halfback, slicing through defenders who weren't sure which was faster, his legs, or the silence that followed the scoreboard. In track, his body obeyed no limits. He long jumped farther than any other college athlete in the nation. Record after record, set with footsteps steady as thunder. Basketball, he weaved through defenders with a grace that made the court look smaller, and baseball, well, baseball was the most resistant. The diamond felt colder, quieter around him. Pitchers threw differently, not just fast, mean. Spectators mumbled louder, and even teammates sometimes threw glances harder than any fastball. Still, he stood at home plate. Wrist cocked, eyes narrowed, refusing to flinch. Coaches praised him, then asked if he could dial it back, just a little. Just enough to make others comfortable. But Jackie didn't play smaller to ease discomfort. He played honest, played whole. Though the trophies came, they came wrapped in contradiction. He was celebrated but sidelined. Admired but never really welcomed. Restaurants near campus wouldn't serve him. Barbers paused when he walked in. Rooms felt quiet not with awe but calculation. And still, he carried himself without apology. He began to understand something. That greatness didn't grant immunity. That to some, his excellence only made his presence harder to accept. When he high jumped or scored, their silence wasn't confusion, it was control. They clapped just enough to stay civil. Never enough to invite. In class, he sat straight. Took notes in margins. Wrote essays like he played, sharp, precise, with just enough depth to hint there was more he wasn't saying. Because he couldn't afford to say it all. Not yet, so he poured his fullness into moments instead. That hole in one shot from midcourt. That impossible interception. That stride across the finish line that made stopwatch hands tremble. Jackie wasn't angry. Not quite. But what pulsed through him now wasn't just ambition, it was purpose. A quiet roar growing louder in the waiting. In locker rooms, he learned to carry silence like a second jersey. On campus lawns, he learned to nod without stepping closer. He saw what happened when you outgrew the skin they wanted you to stay inside. They smiled less. They questioned more. How did he do it all? How could he be so disciplined, so fast, so focused, and still be just himself? Jackie knew the answer. He had learned it young. From his mother's hands. From Pepper Street's cracked sidewalks. From every empty seat at lunch. You carry the weight. You keep your chin level. You run as if someone's eternity depends on how far you take the baton. And maybe it did, so he kept running, kept scoring, kept showing every field, court, track, and diamond what stubborn grace looked like in motion. He wasn't trying to be the best. He was trying to be undeniable. And slowly, word began to stir beyond the UCLA bleachers. Stories of the athlete who broke records and wore injustice without breaking stride. Someone, somewhere, was always watching. And history was clearing its throat again. It wasn't freedom he found in the uniform. It was contradiction dressed in olive green. In 1942, when Jackie joined the U.S. Army, he wasn't chasing glory. He was answering the call. A country at war, and a man who still believed service might prove his worth. They gave him a number, a barracks, a rifle, but patriotism, it turned out, had a color line too. He trained in boots too stiff, on bases too southern, where the mud whispered slurs in. The rules bent in the same direction they always had. At Fort Riley, he applied to officer candidate school. Was denied. Silent paperwork, invisible decisions. Until Joe Louis, yes, that kind of champion, intervened. And things moved. Jackie became a second lieutenant. But rank didn't erase racism. Didn't buffer him from glances or give him peace in mess halls where white officers sat fuller, louder. Then came Fort Hood, Texas, where heat clung to skin like threat, and every bus ride was a test of what you'd swallow. One evening, stationed, uniformed, Jackie boarded a military bus, sat near the front. The driver told him to move. The past stirred in his chest, the taste of Pasadena, the weight of empty seats, the timbre of being told, less. But this time, he said no. Not with fists, not with shouting, just no, steady, calm. The driver called ahead. MPs met him at the stop. They cuffed him, questioned him, doused him in humiliation. He faced the weight of a court-martial. Official charges, whispers of insubordination, unspoken truths lingering beneath formal words. He stood before military brass, all eyes tilted down at him. They weren't trying to understand. They were trying to remind him what wasn't written in law but etched in the marrow of the system. Men like him didn't get to say no. But facts, this time, stood where fairness might not. Witnesses spoke truth. Procedure unraveled. The charges dissolved. Acquitted, but not whole. The army had taken something from him and never quite gave it back. Not flesh, but trust. He left the service a free man. But his honor was something he had to carry without ceremony. No medals, no welcome. Just silence and memory. He returned home into a country still at war, not just overseas but within itself. The kind of war that never made leaflets, never got dates on calendars, but endured in bus seats, job lines, housing codes, and every corner where freedom flirted with hypocrisy. And yet, Jackie didn't stop believing that something better could be built. He couldn't afford sainthood, but he could afford resolve. He learned that dignity wasn't something awarded. It was chosen, fought for, protected. The kind of dignity that walks onto a battlefield without ever lifting a gun. Just a spine held straight. What the military meant to break only confirmed who he already was. Unshakable, clear-eyed, and ready. Not for baseball, not yet, but ready for the next time history tested him. The next time someone told him to move. And expected him to disappear. Baseball sounded different here. Not like it did in hushed college fields or sandlot echoes. In Kansas City, it crackled, fast, joyful, raw. Leather slapped louder. Voices bounced between dugouts like songs only the weary knew how to hum. Jackie joined the Monarchs in 1945. The uniform fit, sharp and purposeful. Royal blue stitched with decades of exclusion and excellence too bold to be hidden. The Negro Leagues weren't a compromise. They were a kingdom, built by hands denied access but too brilliant to wait for permission. He shared the field with men carved from persistence. Satchel Paige, Buck O'Neil, players who smiled through steel and played with grace taught by resistance. The stadiums weren't grand, but the games? Electric. Vendors hawked peanuts over the hum of jazz bands. Bleachers swayed under Sunday suits and Sunday prayers. Children chased foul balls like dreams that might land softly this time. Jackie adjusted quickly. Second base, quick hands, quicker legs. He hit .387 that season. But the stats didn't matter as much as the feeling. The crack of the bat. The glide into third. The understanding. Here, he wasn't breaking through barriers. He was surrounded by those already broken and rebuilt better. And yet, something tugged. A quiet ache beneath the cheers. An awareness that these gifted men deserved more than segregated dust and applause that never echoed beyond city lines. Jackie respected the Monarchs, felt honored, but he also felt the ceiling, low, wooden, splintered with reminders that glory here was still confined. He kept a notebook, wrote down pitchers' habits, timing the cadence between curves and curveballs thrown by a society unsure if it could stomach change. He traveled by bus, 10-hour rides, legs stiff with questions. Gas stations that denied them restrooms. Restaurants that brought food in paper, but never in warmth. Still, the team laughed. Told stories from the back row about games played in shadows and triumphs no box score could contain. They mentored him, taught him how to manage the taunts, how to smile when your dignity's on trial. They saw he had the tools, but needed shape. Edge, not just muscle, but meaning behind every move. He listened, learned when to speak, when to whisper, when to make them listen without raising your voice. Word spread about the rookie with lightning legs and a temper coiled too carefully. People were watching again, not scouts, not yet. But something even more dangerous. Expectation. Some wondered if he would stay. If fame might distract him from the mission. But Jackie wasn't chasing limelight. He wanted inclusion that didn't come with conditions. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a man pored over headlines. Looked past batting averages and into something heavier. Branch Rickey didn't see stats. He saw stance, posture under pressure. And Jackie, fresh from the Monarchs' road dust and dugout gospel, moved like someone who already knew he was meant for more. He could feel it, the shift, not ambition, alignment, like fate was inching closer, clicking pieces into place quietly, firmly. He still laughed in the locker room, still tipped his cap to elders, still ran hard, every time, even when the score didn't ask him to. Because someone always was, watching, doubting, and preparing to test whether talent was enough to temper the storm that loomed ahead. In the evenings, he sat alone. Games behind him, country before him, just a bench, a breath, and the knowledge that history doesn't send invitations, it sends provocations. And soon, his would arrive. Behind a modest door in Brooklyn, oak shelves kissed ceiling beams, and Branch Rickey sat breathing in plans no one else dared to outline. He wasn't quiet because he lacked ideas. He was quiet because some dreams are loud enough on their own. The papers on his desk were arranged with care. Not just stats but stories. Notes in the margins. Questions underlined twice. Who could hold the weight without breaking? He knew what he wanted. Needed. A player, yes. But something rarer. A spirit steady enough to hold back the tide without ever undoing the shore. News had reached him, of the second baseman out of Kansas City. The one who ran like someone escaping doubt. Who batted like a man scoring more than runs. Rickey sent for Jackie. They met in a room too small for history yet somehow perfect for it. No fanfare. Just two men and a clock ticking slowly between them. Jackie entered wearing nerves beneath discipline. His handshake was firm, eyes steady. carrying all the questions he couldn't afford to ask out loud. Ricky got to the point. You have the talent. No argument. A pause. Ink drying slower than air. But I need to know, can you carry something heavier than baseball? Jackie shifted faintly in his seat. Ricky pressed on, more direct this time, sounding less like a general manager and more like an architect laying foundations on trembling ground. I'm looking for a player with guts. Jackie nodded. Guts enough, Ricky continued, not to fight back. Silence swelled, thick enough to taste. Jackie's jaw tensed. You could see his hands considering the table's edge. Considering all the times he had swallowed rage. Replayed insults like broken records. Turned fists into silence so many times he no longer trusted the tremble in his chest. You want someone who doesn't care? Jackie asked, almost too quiet. No, Ricky said. I want someone who cares deeply. Who hurts deeply, but still refuses to hit back. The words didn't lift the burden. They clarified it. Ricky stood then, acted out the jeers Jackie might face. The slurs, the spitting fans, the teammates who might leave him out to freeze in his own dugout. He shouted epithets, roared in mock aggression. Jackie sat, pulse hammering but shoulders locked. He didn't blink, didn't rise, didn't swing. Could you do it? Ricky asked one last time. Could you be that man? Jackie breathed in and out again. Then said, I've got two cheeks. Not bravado. Not submission. A statement of strategy. Of control over a fire that people would soon try to name for him. Ricky extended his hand. That handshake wasn't just agreement. It was a match strike. The tightening of a thread that reached through time. There were no contracts signed that day. But something far more permanent was decided. Two men, in two chairs, in one room, and the axis shifted. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Streetcars rung, newspapers fluttered, but inside that small office, a revolution tapped gently on wood and said, I'm almost ready. And Jackie Robinson stood, not taller than before, just truer. History made no noise, but it very much happened. Montreal didn't look like change. It looked like clean sidewalks and soft evenings. A city with polite winters and politer strangers. But for Jackie, it was the first place that didn't feel like a battlefield. In 1946, he wore a Royals uniform, number 9 tucked onto his back, stitches tight against hope too large to hold quietly. Minor league, yes, but everything about it felt major. Not in stadium size or headline ink, but in tone. In breath. In chance. The crowd leaned in when he batted. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. Baseball fans, real ones, watched, not to judge but to understand. On opening day, he stepped onto the field, shoulders squared, mind curled against reflex. He expected the boos, expected the stares, but they didn't come. Instead, a quiet respect settled in the stands like snow that chooses where to fall. Children waved, mothers pointed, men clapped, slowly at first, then louder as line drives met gloves and stolen bases stitched the air. He remembered the names yelled back in the South. But here, there were no slurs hurled from rooftops. Only cheers. Warm, surprised, earnest. He didn't trust it yet. How could he? But he allowed himself, for the first time in years, to breathe while running. Not just through the bases, through the possibility that not all stadiums had walls built from resentment. Jackie hit .349 that season. Scored 113 runs. Stole nearly as many bases as some teams attempted. But numbers were shadows. What mattered was presence. The way teammates began sharing dugout jokes without checking over their shoulders. The way children asked for signatures on crumpled ticket stubs, hands extended like trust. Montreal didn't change America, but for Jackie, it offered a glimpse, a pause in the storm. A place where his uniform wasn't a dare or a protest, just fabric and pride. Still, he never took the field without remembering who watched from afar. Not just Ricky in Brooklyn, but every boy back home. Taught when to lower their heads and when not to speak. He carried them, carried his mother's voice, carried Fort Hood and Pepper Street, and every locker room where laughter stopped when he entered. But each time he slid across home plate, he smeared a little more doubt off the surface of baseball. Made the game warmer, inch by inch. And when the Royals clinched the league championship, fans poured onto the field. Not to yell, to lift him. They held him overhead like a banner, like an answer. Not just number 9, but something greater. He didn't cry, not then, but the silence in his father's absence seemed smaller somehow. The weight shifted. Montreal had offered a gentle rehearsal for the roar that was coming. Taught him that not all cheers came with strings. Baseball had finally looked at Jackie Robinson and, just for one season, smiled back. Not out of pity, not out of politics, but out of something closer, to earned affection. The kind that says, "You belong." And though history would ask more of him than any game ever could, for one spring beneath maple-lined skies, he played not just with defiance, but with joy. April 15, 1947. The morning came without ceremony. Just light filtering through a Brooklyn window, coffee gone cold on a kitchen table, and nerves too loud to quiet with routine. Jackie tied his cleats like he'd done 1,000 times. But this time, they felt heavier, as if history had stitched itself into the laces. He didn't speak much that morning. There was nothing left to say. No speeches, no protests. Just a jersey with no name, and a number that would come to mean more than a position on a roster. 42. He stepped onto Ebbets Field with breath held tight. Not in fear, but in readiness. The way someone prepares for a storm they've already survived in smaller pieces. The stands were full of curiosity, of resentment, of silence sharpened by glances that didn't need words to wound. Some cheered, many didn't. Across the diamond, the opposition stared like they were waiting for him to break. Teammates stood near, but not beside. Distance, it seemed, was still safer than unity. He jogged to first base, his position, his island. Fans jeered from the stands, slurs that curled in the cold April air, vile enough to sting, familiar enough not to surprise. But Jackie didn't flinch, didn't look up. He kept his glove ready, his feet steady, his spine wrapped in the kind of control that only years of being tested can teach. The first at-bat came. He walked to the plate, bat cradled in hands that once carried Army-issued rifles, bus protest, and a mother's hopes whispered across decades. Pitch 1. Ball. Pitch 2. He swings. Foul. The sound echoed too long, as if baseball itself was deciding how loudly to react to this new chapter. On his third try, he connected. Not a home run, not even a double. But it bounced fair, and Jackie ran. Feet pounding toward first like feet that had been waiting a lifetime to move. He reached safely. No applause from the opposing dugout. A few claps behind the home bench. But the loudest sound was the sheer refusal to be erased. Every step he took after was an act not just of participation, but defiance. When he stole second, they called it bold. When he stole third, they whispered, "Show off." When he crossed home, they didn't cheer. But history nodded quietly. This wasn't just a game opening. It was a season unlocking something buried. Elsewhere across America, radios crackled. Kids listened, some black, some white, all hearing the same box score, but not the same story. Jackie didn't smile much that day. But he hadn't been asked to smile. He'd been asked to carry it. All of it. The anger. The expectation. The unspoken vow to never strike back no matter how loudly the crowd asked for it. And he did. Unshakably. Baseball, that day, did not transform. The world did not erupt in change. But a seed was split, small, fragile, deliberate. The diamond held more than chalk and cleats now. It held proof that strength doesn't always swing for fences. Sometimes it just stands there, still, visible, undeniable, and beneath the scoreboard with numbers changing slowly. So did everything else. The boos came early. Before the anthem finished, before Jackie laced up his cleats. They arrived like storm clouds with no intention to pass. Heavy, constant, unmistakable. Voices from the bleachers carried venom softened by distance. Go back where you came from. You don't belong here. Some spat onto the field. Others just stared, as if watching a test they were sure would fail. Jackie didn't respond, didn't lift his eyes. He buttoned his jersey, tied his glove tight, and met the diamond like a man walking into weather he'd seen 100 times before. The taunts were precise, practiced, even. No accidental cruelty, only rehearsed hate. Words like stones, names not worth repeating, yet carved into his memory all the same. From the dugout, teammates pretended not to hear. Or they grimaced and looked away. Even the good ones stayed still. Stillness born of discomfort, not fairness. Opponents lined their side of the field with cold smiles and sharpened jokes. Pitchers who threw high and inside, just enough to make a point. Fielders who muttered as he passed, as if each base he touched had been earned through audacity, not skill. Jackie absorbed it all, not because he didn't feel it, but because he had decided who he would be before they ever decided what they thought he was. He stood on first base while fans roared with resentment. Shoes scuffed with dust, eyes locked forward, body still except for the twitch of readiness. Like a sprain, like a prayer made flesh. He played clean, flawless, but it wasn't the errors they waited for. It was the crack, the slip, the yell that would confirm what they already believed, that he was too emotional, too angry, too human, but he never gave it to them. Not one time, which somehow made them yell even louder. In Boston, they threw things. In Cincinnati, they threw words even hotter than coffee. In St. Louis, pitchers forgot accuracy for lessons only they knew how to teach. Even clubhouses weren't safe. Notes slipped into lockers. Threats disguised as warnings. Letters that began with, "If he plays." Jackie read them, quietly, folded them in half, and buried them deep in the bottom of his bag. Not because he wanted to forget, but because some fires are better banked. Racism didn't whisper. It screamed, but still he ran, stole second like stealing breath. Glided into double plays with grace his doubters mistook for luck. Batted like a metronome, steady, clear, exact. And every hit was another reminder that excellence was not theirs to define. He didn't answer the noise. He outran it. In doing so, he taught it what dignity under pressure looked like. Not perfection, not sainthood, just restraint, deliberate, bone-deep restraint. He knew those voices, even when he didn't raise his head. Knew the tone, the curl of insult disguised as humor. The silence of seats where good men should have stood up but didn't. And yet, when the inning ended, he didn't sit with spite. He sat with breath steadied, hands still, mind sharper than any insult. Because every day he endured, he chipped something from their grip. Not their hate, hate doesn't fall easily. But their control over the game, the rules, the story they told themselves about who deserved to play, to belong, to win. Jackie's revenge was not rage. It was arrival, consistency, staying through jeers until the cheers had no choice but to follow. It happened slowly, quietly, like most turning points do. Brooklyn was home field now. A patch of green wrapped in tension and tobacco smoke and the kind of silence that follows someone who walks into a story he wasn't invited to tell. But every story has a moment. A shift. A gesture too simple to be a headline, too soft to shake the ground, but enough to move something deeper. This one wore number 1. Pee Wee Reese. White. Southern. Born in Kentucky, raised on dusty values that rarely crossed color lines. He had heard the noise too. Watched the jeers aimed at Jackie. Heard what they called him in Cincinnati, in St. Louis. In the locker room, on the train. Sometimes, in hushed corners of their own dugout. And for a while, he did what most did. Nothing. Until the road led them to Crosley Field. Cincinnati. Just across the Ohio River from Pee Wee's hometown. His people were here. Friends. Family. Neighbors who believed certain truths that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The pregame warm-up began. Jackie jogged alone near first, a target in motion. Boos rose from the crowd again. Nothing new. Just louder, more vicious, carried by throats that echoed generations. The names weren't names. They were knives. Jackie didn't look up, didn't acknowledge. He just stretched, warmed up his glove, and waited, alone, again. And then, without ceremony, Pee Wee walked over. Not rushed, not dramatic, just walked. Jackie felt him before he saw him. Shoes crunching softly on dirt. A shadow easing its way beside his. Pee Wee didn't say much. Didn't clear his throat or preach. He just placed one arm, casually, across Jackie's narrow shoulders. Held it there, let it rest, and Cincinnati went quiet. A hand, that's all, but it thundered louder than every insult that had ever hissed from those seats. No speech, no angry rebuttal, just a shortstop from Louisville standing beside a first baseman from Pasadena and saying, without saying, enough. They stood there for a long second. Long enough to be seen. Long enough for cameras. Long enough for boys in the crowd to ask their fathers why. Jackie didn't move, didn't need to. In that moment, he wasn't alone on the field. Not just in space, but in story. Pee Wee eventually dropped his arm. Went back to warm-ups. Didn't seek praise. Or articles. Or images for the history books. But the image stuck anyway. Because something shifted. Not the hate. That would linger, clinging to corners like mildew. But the silence? That loosened. Someone in the crowd stopped jeering. Someone else clapped. Small, unsure, but real. And Jackie? He didn't smile. He didn't have to. He just played, with a little less weight between his shoulders and a little more space to breathe. Because in that gesture, someone else had carried part of the burden. Even for a moment, that moment became a map. For how allies move, not with words, but presence. And though they would not talk about it often, would not revisit it in interviews or locker rooms, both men remembered. Because sometimes, resistance looks like protest. And sometimes, it just looks like a hand resting on another man's back. Jackie came home to whispers. Not the kind from dugouts or bleachers, but the ones that slip through walls, cling to curtains, hide in the eyes of neighbors who smiled too tightly. Rachel knew it too. They had married quietly, between seasons and headlines, between the roar of baseball and the deeper silence of war wounds unhealed. She was calm fire, grace wrapped in steel, the kind of partner who didn't just wait, she carried. Their apartment in Brooklyn was modest. Walls thin, windows that only half kept the noise out. But they filled it with rituals, simple dinners, coffee in chipped mugs, postcards from cities that Jackie ran through like wind. Home was not grand, but it was refuge. And yet, the world kept pressing in. Letters slid under the door in envelopes with no return address. Some typed. Some scrawled in ink that curved sideways like anger too heavy to control. If you don't stop, someone will. Be careful, they're watching. Leave, or you'll be gone. Threats filled the mailbox. At night, Rachel would pull the blinds, twice, then once more just to be sure. Jackie never asked her to. They just lived like that now. Sometimes, the phone rang and no one spoke. Just breathing. A silence louder than most violence. She answered less and less. When he traveled, she stayed near the phone in case the news came sideways. In case she had to gather herself before the pavement could rush up to meet her. Jackie felt the weight, not just on the field, but in the shape his wife's shoulders took when she folded laundry, as if folding prayers between each shirt. He touched her hand often, quiet affirmations passed through fingertips. Love spoken in stillness. At games, she sat among crowds that stared just a beat too long. Families with picnic baskets who shifted when she came too close. She sat anyway, back straight, hat tilted just so. A protest in posture. And every time Jackie ran, every base he stole, he thought of her safety, her breath, her waiting. Being first came with echoes, shook loose the kind of hate that doesn't just target a man, but everything he loves. The Dodgers offered protection, but not promise. Brooklyn cheered, but only in parts. Once, a brick broke the window. No warning, just glass falling across their kitchen table like hail. Rachel swept it herself, didn't flinch. Jackie came home late that night. She didn't mention the brick, just handed him tea and asked how the game went. They understood that some stories you protect from each other. He wanted to shield her, but Rachel was his shield. She read the headlines, knew the scores, watched the way applause changed its tone. She could tell which cities buzzed with danger by the way his voice slowed on the phone. And through it all, they kept walking. Together, down sidewalks that shuddered at their presence. Into restaurants that only served through gritted teeth. When children stared, Rachel smiled. When adults sneered, Jackie nodded and kept walking. They raised their son in that city. Taught him about joy and justice, without ever using those words. He saw it in the way his father's hands curled around a bat without ever closing into fists. In the way his mother hummed when the house needed soothing more than sound. Fame would not save them. Statistics would not protect them. But they built sanctuary in glimpses. In glances that said, I see you. I still choose this. I still choose us. That was their triumph, not just integration, not just games won, but love, bare-knuckled and iron-backed, refusing to be scared silent. Because history doesn't just test the hero. It tests whatever the hero loves. And Jackie passed every test by showing up again and again, not just in stadiums, but in kitchens where his son played with toy gloves, and Rachel stood with her hands in soap water, smiling small. So he'd never see the fear she had already wrung straight down the drain. He wore it like skin, this thing called first. Not a medal, not a title, something heavier, like mist that clung no matter how fast he ran, no matter how loud the cheers sounded when he crossed home. Being first meant nothing was routine. Every base he stole was a question mark. Every swing a negotiation with eyes ready to turn triumph into exception. Jackie Robinson didn't just play baseball. He translated it, took a language meant for one kind of man and spoke it back in a dialect none had considered before. That year, he led the league in stolen bases. RBIs came like thunder after drought. But the numbers, they were only the surface. Underneath, tireless calculation. When to speak up, when to lower his gaze. When to smile even as the bile rose in his throat. On the road, there were hotels that lost reservations. Restaurants that offered their coldest food warmest. Steakhouses that claimed they ran out of everything but silence. He walked through all of them, like a man used to bumping his head on ceilings and still refusing to crawl. Teammates slowly shifted, some by discomfort, others by witnessing. Victory has a way of rearranging perspective, but Jackie never waited for approval. He played as if the game belonged to him because, deep down, he knew it could. But the burden soaked him. He didn't complain, didn't announce it, but at night, his hands trembled more. His breath caught at odd hours. Like his body knew it was expected not to crack and cracked in secret anyway. Rachel saw it, didn't say, rest, knew that wasn't a choice. So she made rest in other ways. Warm food, hands pressed gently on the back of his neck. A kind of love that didn't ask questions, just stayed near until the shaking stopped. Reporters came often. Microphones hungry, not for stats but for softness, for rage, for anything they could misplace into a headline. He gave them answers simple, calm, the sharpness tucked behind his molars. When asked how it felt to be first, he'd say, "It feels like playing baseball." But what he meant was, "It feels like carrying a house on my back and still being asked to sprint." No umpire ever called it. No fan ever cheered it. But every inning he survived as himself, not just black, but fully human, was a victory beyond the box score. Because being first isn't about what you do. It's about who you are when no one makes space for that doing to matter. And Jackie didn't ask for space. He carved it, quietly, repeatedly, until one day, the space stopped shrinking back. The dugout wasn't shelter. It was stage, closet, mirror, sometimes a cage. In there, Jackie sat close to the quiet. Helmet brushed smooth by routine. Glove folded with care, as if borrowing silence before the roar. It was where he waited to bat, waited to be booed, waited for the echo of names not his own, but thrown, still meant for him. Inside, teammates laced cleats, studied signs, chewed tobacco like habit. But Jackie, he studied breath, practiced stillness like an art. Because rage couldn't live here. Not even for a second. Not when the whole country thought one outburst would prove them right. So he learned how to exhale under pressure, how to blink slow enough to let insult pass, how to swallow even the cleanest fury because dignity was fragile and always on display. Bench chatter buzzed around him, trades, stats, inside jokes. Only some were shared in his direction. Even now, even this deep into the season, some words skirted past him like he wasn't quite in the room. He laughed occasionally, warm but measured, each gesture a negotiation. Show too much, and they call it arrogance. Too little, and it's cold. Balance, always. He didn't speak of the letters. Didn't mention the threats that arrived folded and foul. Messages with venom in place of postage. He just folded them back and let the dugout hold them in silence. Because mentioning danger where others rest isn't always welcome. Instead, he sat when needed, rose when called, and watched the game like a man watching his own test play out in 9 innings. Sometimes a teammate leaned over past a glove or a joke. Small mercies. And slowly, inch by inch, the mood shifted. When he cracked a double and stood firm at second, the dugout wasn't just still with awe. It stirred, clapped, a few slaps on the back, where once there was space. Respect didn't come all at once. It arrived like weather, unpredictable. But some days, gracious. By mid-season, players who once averted eyes waited in silence when he returned from at-bats. The way a family does when someone endures something they can't explain but hope to honor. In one corner, a rookie mimicked his stance. Not mockery, modeling. Jackie saw it and smiled, briefly. Then leaned back against the bench like he always had. Because he didn't need the dugout to worship. He only needed it to hold. Hold his peace, his restraint, his stillness when the world outside demanded chaos. Between innings, he stared at the field not just as opponent or teammate, but as witness. Every blade of grass a record of what it meant to hold your center in a storm disguised as sport. Dignity doesn't walk out with the lineup. Sometimes, it stays right there, on the bench. Waiting with you, worn, but intact. And each time Jackie stood up from that bench, he left behind more than splinters. He left proof. By 1949, the fire wasn't waiting anymore. It roared. That year, Jackie was unstoppable. Stole bases like secrets. Swung like he meant to shatter silence, and often did. He batted .342. Led the league in stolen bases. Drove in 124 runs. The numbers stacked up like proof, not just of talent, but of something larger cracking open. They gave him the MVP, most valuable player, but by then, Valuable felt too small a word. Because Jackie wasn't just outplaying the league, he was outlasting it. You could see it in the way umpires started calling games straighter. In how pitchers held back from the throw meant to send a message. Maybe because messages don't work when your target never flinches. Brooklyn responded loudest. Children wore his number in chalk on their sleeves. Vendors learned his name in 20 different accents. Whole blocks cheered his triples like church bells on Sunday. But new weight came, too. He stood now not just for what was possible, but for what was overdue. And the critics shifted tones. Not gone, just change. Now they wondered if he was too outspoken, too political, asked why he wouldn't just play. But Jackie had long since learned, when you carry a nation's progress in your walk, they'll call your footsteps noise. So he spoke, at banquets, in interviews, to reporters who fumbled through questions, and to kids who needed no questions at all. He spoke of inequality, of injustice that lingered behind the curtains of stadiums, of contracts still unpaid and hotels still closed. And yes, he scared people. Not with fury, with clarity. A man who could play that well and think this deeply. He didn't fit neatly onto trading cards. But Jackie wasn't trying to be palatable. He was trying to be full. His voice sharpened that year. His eyes didn't soften, not even for cameras. Rachel stood beside him through it all. Iron in her spine, laughter at dinner tables that still carried tension in the furniture. She saw the toll, the way he rubbed his knees longer after games, the way his sleep broke before dawn. But the purpose kept him upright. He was no longer asking to exist. He was asking the game, and its gatekeepers, to evolve. And some did. More black players reached the majors. Some because of him, some in spite, but all because the path had been cleared by someone who refused to wait for tolerance to ripen. Jackie played fiercely, because even now, even as MVP, he knew one bad season could be used to rewrite the story. So he gave them none. Only excellence. Only defiance carved into box scores. Only dignity pounded into baselines. And as summer wore on and the pennant race burned hotter, the crowds no longer came to observe a miracle. They came to watch a man do what he was born to do. Not quietly, not carefully, completely. He didn't just belong now. He led, not just in stats, but in standard, not just in history, but in now. And beneath it all, between doubleheaders and delays, he looked out from the dugout and saw the future approaching. Running hard, ready to take the next base. The All-Star games changed after Jackie. So did the questions. Journalists no longer asked just about batting averages. They asked about race, about politics, about lines that might extend beyond foul territory. And Jackie didn't dodge. He answered, even when the answers left rooms uneasy. Because silence, he had learned, could be a kind of permission. He stood behind microphones the way he stood in the batter's box, balanced, steady, prepared for the swing. By 1952, he was speaking out more. About injustices the game hadn't fixed. About housing discrimination, about black soldiers who returned from Korea to closed doors and closed minds. He used his name like Flint, spoke in places where crowds were segregated even if the outfield wasn't. Some fans turned on him. Others stood taller. But Jackie had never been interested in applause for its own sake. He had learned early, the same crowd that cheers a double play might fall silent at the truth. He joined political campaigns, sided with causes, endorsed candidates. He supported Richard Nixon once, believing principle mattered more than platform. Later, he backed civil rights organizations with restless energy, helped raise funds for NAACP initiatives, used his fame to shine a light where America still fumbled for the switch. Not everyone in the movement embraced him. Some wanted more fire, others less polish, but Jackie wasn't trying to be their voice. He was trying to be his own. He wrote letters, challenged leaders, even clashed with other activists when he felt the rhetoric outpaced the responsibility. There were times he stood alone again, holding lines no one else wanted. But he didn't shake. He had lost the luxury of neutrality the first time someone spat at his cleats and called it tradition. Political Jackie wasn't different from the player, just less restrained. Because now, the rules couldn't eject him. He was no longer swinging to prove he could belong. He was speaking to make sure those coming next wouldn't have to. He returned to colleges, spoke to young athletes, urged them not just to play, but to vote, to read, to lead. He told them change wasn't just about surviving the game. It was about owning it. Still, the threats didn't end. Still, the letters came. Still, the sharp edge of being too much followed him. But Jackie understood something most didn't. That justice wasn't a line drive. It was bunt after bunt, advance after advance, sacrifice after sacrifice. And sometimes, it took years just to steal second. He didn't know it would be his last. But maybe he felt it. There was a different ache in his joints that year. The kind time leaves behind, not injury. The Dodgers were moving without the urgency of youth now. And Jackie? He moved with history tethered to his ankles. It was October 1956. Game 7, the World Series. Ebbets Field swelled with tension, but the roar felt distant. Dodgers, Yankees, one more dance under the lights. He took the field, number 42 as crisp as ever, but slower rising from crouches, slower returning to the bag. The fire still lived in him, but some of its edges had cooled. Years of diving headfirst into fury had left their marks. On knees wrapped tight, on shoulders pulled forward, on the eyes that scanned the crowd not just for fans, but for threats. Jackie had never demanded farewell. Never asked baseball to decorate his exits. So, they didn't. He played as always. Hard, sharp, watchful. One base hit, a run scored, a stolen base, final and defiant. He still ran when the game didn't expect him to. Because even now, especially now, he refused to let the game grow comfortable in his presence. The crowd clapped, politely. Not cold, just unknowing. They didn't realize this was the last time they'd see him in uniform. That this stance, this swing, this run, was history's final draft. The Yankees won that day. And Jackie stood at the top step of the dugout for a long moment after it ended. Watching the field desert itself. Teammates disappeared toward locker rooms and contracts. Reporters moved fast to newer legends. Cameras aimed elsewhere. Jackie turned slowly, glove loose in his hand. He didn't wave, didn't linger, just walked into the tunnel, light behind him, silence ahead. No ceremony, no curtain, just legend making its final walk. Weeks later, the Dodgers traded his contract to the Giants. And Jackie said no, said he'd already played the biggest game. That if he couldn't do it with his body whole, he wouldn't do it at all. He retired with no press conference. Wrote a note, gave a few words to one paper. Said he was moving on. And just like that, quietly, with dignity, he did. The locker sat empty. The cleats unlaced. The bat leaned in a corner, untouched. But no one dared sit in his place. Because Jackie hadn't just left a position. He had etched a path. For others to stand taller. Run harder. Speak freer. And though his name left the lineup, it never left the game. He didn't wear suits for statues. Didn't chase tribute. But the world was ready to remember him, even if it hadn't always known how to see him. It was 1962. Hall of Fame. Cooperstown crowned with quiet clouds and a microphone waiting for more than words. Jackie stepped to the podium, not like a man receiving honor, but like a man remembering the cost of it. A bronze plaque shimmered nearby, bearing numbers and positions, accolades and measurements. But none of it explained who he truly was. He looked out over the crowd. Some teammates, reporters, Children in the back, squinting as if trying to make memory real. "You can hate a man for many reasons," he once said, "but color isn't one of them." That day, he didn't mention the booze. Didn't catalog the slurs or the sting of locker room silence. He spoke shorter than most. Thanked Branch Rickey. Thanked his mother. Thanked Rachel. With a pause that closed the room in grace. Behind him, the plaque read, Jack Roosevelt Robinson. Debut. April 15, 1947. First African American to play in the major leagues in the modern era. But nowhere did it say, survivor of threats, soldier of restraint, bearer of change, yet all of it lived in his eyes, still clear, still sharp, but now softened by the distance between injustice and recognition. Fans walked Cooperstown's halls that summer, some pausing before Jackie's plaque longer than the others. Not because of the stats, but because of what stood beside them. Proof that dignity, when worn loud enough, becomes legend. He aged fast, broken by diabetes, by the public's endless grasp, by a body that had always labored under more than muscle. But still, he moved with strength. He gave speeches, joined marches, challenged baseball's leaders to open the dugouts wider, not just for players, but for managers, for executives. He said, "I'm not concerned with your liking or disliking me. All I ask is that you respect me as a human being." He meant it, still. The invitations kept coming. Ceremonies, awards, commencements. Each time, he stood like a man hoping not to be remembered but to remind. In photos from those years, his smile is narrow. His eyes, not sad, but searching. Always searching for signs that what he broke had stayed broken. Sometimes, he didn't find them. Sometimes, he saw new cracks forming in different places. But still, he showed up. Still, he stood. At Cooperstown, visitors come now not just to read names, but to feel something larger. To pass their fingers beneath the burnished bronze of Jackie's face and whisper quiet thanks to the man who found a way to change the world without once shouting it down. They didn't retire his number to honor the past. They did it to remind the future. In 1997, 50 years after Jackie first stepped onto Ebbets Field, every team in Major League Baseball agreed. Number 42 would be worn no more, by anyone, ever again. Except once a year. Every April 15th, the jerseys come back. Dozens, hundreds of players wearing the same number, no names, just 42. On that day, the field belongs not to individuals, but to what one man carried when he walked alone. And yet, somehow, Jackie had already been fading. Not in spirit, but in body. Diabetes dimmed his sight. Time stole from his legs what he'd once given so freely. He appeared at events in sunglasses, his hand gripped to Rachel's like an anchor. Still upright, still asking, still questioning what had changed, and what hadn't. He watched the world shift in pieces. Saw black mayors, black players in every clubhouse. Even saw the country pause, finally, long enough to say, "We remember." In 1962, he entered the Hall of Fame. No speech full of fireworks. Just thanks. To his mother. To Ricky. To Rachel, who had never left his side. He said he hoped someday a black manager would follow. That the dugouts might finally reflect the fields. He died in 1972. A heart too called upon, perhaps. A body that bore weight no medicine could remedy. Just 53. And yet, he'd lived more than most ever dare. Tens of thousands flooded his funeral. A nation bowed, not just to a player, but to a vessel. Of change, of courage, of something impossibly American and impossibly rare. Now, all these years later, his number still stands. Not just in stadium rafters, but in classrooms. In streets. In the quiet defiance of anyone told they don't belong. What Jackie did was larger than baseball. He didn't just open a door. He stood in it, held it open with shaking hands, and dared the world to walk through better. The game has changed. The country too, in ways. But something still whisper familiar. And that's why his story doesn't end. Because every time someone slides into second with the world watching, every time a kid pulls on a jersey and dares to believe they belong on that field, in that moment, Jackie breathes again. Silent, steady, undeniably there, not just remembered, present.